So, Marcia, great to have you here, and glad we could make time because we are on different sides of the world right now, right?
Yes, we are. You can definitely say that.
Yeah. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling you from the Netherlands today. So for me, it's late at night already.
Okay, yeah, and we were just having that conversation around I suppose, the World Cup happening at this time of the year when it's cold because it's normally in the summer, right? And then you get a chance to hang out.
Yeah, and apparently I'm the type of, well, I was going to say football fan, but I have to be honest, I don't think I'm an actual football fan. I think it's more the atmosphere when World Cup is in summer that you go out with your friends and you have a good time. And man, I'm just too Caribbean to go outside in the Netherlands in winter and watch football matches. It's just not, not my thing. So I've been inside a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in California today, and it's like the first sight of rain that we've had for a while because we need it because of many
Yeah.
different reasons, a lot of fires and so on. But I'm still like,
Yeah.
oh, it's a little bit cold for me now. I think I've softened since moving from London. So,
I do believe you have, yes.
yeah, exactly. Well, look, I'm really excited to have this conversation, and as we've been talking about in various discussions around culture at a general level. But what I was really interested in learning, I think a lot of our audience will be, is based on your background and your approach, this opportunity, I'm going to call it an opportunity to have a scientific approach to culture. So I'm really excited to learn more about how you approach building culture and community.
Hmm.
And I think we should start by talking a little bit about how you got to where you are today. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think we had a little brief discussion about it, but I think for the audience, it'd be great to know, how did you become a doctor and a neuroscientist?
Yeah, that was a journey in itself. So, I actually didn't go to college until I was 24 years old. And that was because when I was younger, like when I was very young in primary school, I was always the smart kid. So I was always the kid who was doing well. I didn't need any extra help, but I was too young to skip a grade. So I was always like bored, if I'm honest, in primary school. And then I went to high school and things got difficult for me because high
Wow.
school is just like, yeah, it got difficult. And I had never learned how to learn. So for the longest time, I thought I was dumb. I sincerely, genuinely thought I was not a smart kid starting when I was maybe 14, 15 years old, like when maths and calculus start getting really difficult. That's when I was like, oh, and all of a sudden I have to put an effort into it. And I'd never learned how to do that. So for the longest time, I did graduate from high school. I have no idea how. I sincerely don't know. I cannot tell you how I made that happen because everybody thought I was going to fail, but I made it. And then I just thought, I don't think college is for me. So I worked for a number of years. I was a PA to a DJ for a while, traveled the
Oh,
world.
wow.
Yeah, well, it's fun to talk about. Looking back on it, when I was in the middle of it, it was mostly just very tiring. And I did a lot of other different jobs until I was 24 years old. And I was working as a secretary. And my boss back then actually said to me, Marcia, what are you doing here? Why are you have so much more potential than you're showing right now? And that's when, for me, that's when I was like, okay, I'm just going to take the risk. I'm going to try. I have to add to the fact that a couple of years before then, I actually already wanted to start studying psychology,
Right.
but a psychologist had told me that I wasn't smart enough to go to university. And I believed her. So I didn't go. But then I
Wow.
ended up, yeah, I know that's rough. Yeah. So when I was 24 years old, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna give it a go. Turns out I'm not dumb.
So you, you
I
you
just
figured
needed
you
to
fi- you figured it out.
Yeah, I figured it out at 24 years old. And it is a passion. So I had always been passionate about helping people. I think that's why I was a PA and a secretary, those kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
So with psychology, I just kind of, I found my home and I just loved reading all the books. I did it for fun. I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because I really wanted to. And then when I was almost starting my master's, I got the chance to go to the morgue in the hospital because I was doing this minor in medicine. And this is going to sound a little bit morbid, maybe, but I got to cut up a brain.
Oh, wow.
And that was, yeah, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
What did you learn?
I'm everything, like everything that was, I mean, when you read a book about neuroscience or neuropsychology, like the brain, they have all these different colors. The brain areas are green and yellow and red. They're not like that in real life, obviously. But I distinctly remember I was working on this brain, and we had the same brain for like an entire week. So we build a relationship with the brain, as mad as that may sound. And I got to cut out the amygdala. And the
Wow.
amygdala is one of my favorite brain areas. And when I literally had someone's amygdala in my hand, and that's when I thought, I want to know everything there is to know about the brain. So I just fell in love right then and there.
So it sounds to me that you really found your passion.
Yeah,
And going back to what you said earlier about learning how to learn, I think that's something
yeah,
that's really overlooked. And
yeah,
I probably had quite a similar experience to you,
yeah.
as far as like primary school and going to high school. Mine was a little bit different because I focused so much on playing sports in high school. I
Uh-huh.
wasn't even interested in what I was learning, and I was flying through primary school, and then I was just had one focus, and that was just my passion. And then after that, it was like, okay, like let me go into the real world. And I got a job at 23 and started like selling gym memberships in the gym. And I thought, you know what, there's probably a lot more that I can do. And
Yeah.
yeah, learning how to learn is key. So just on that point, like, how do you learn? What is it that sparks your learning?
For me personally, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. For you personally, what was it that you learned about how to learn?
So I think for me, it was the fact that the subject matter was so close to my heart. Like it was, I think for learning in general, the intrinsic motivation is key. If
Yeah.
we can get kids to be intrinsically motivated about learning, everything else will come. And then everybody has learning styles. You know, some people are visual learners and others just want to just read the text. And there are different ways of learning. But I think the key thing to turn someone into a learner is to motivate them in the right way, to give them a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. And for me, that was psychology. I don't think I would have been equally successful if I'd chosen, because I studied different things. I think I started out studying communication, quite honestly, because I thought it was easy. I thought
Mm.
that's something I can do, so I'll just do that. That's not the right way. I mean, I could sort of fake my way through the exams, but I wasn't really learning anything. So true learning for me came from being intrinsically motivated, from reading it and thinking, oh my word, this is so fascinating. I want to know everything there is to know.
That's that. I think that's really insightful in terms of the subject matter and just diving into that. And as kids, we get some choice,
Yeah.
but we may not get as much choice. And I know that you're spending a lot of time on that work today. And so in between that, just from my understanding, there was also a moment in your life where you connected with someone in the recruiting industry, and
I
they spotted
did.
some potential in you. And a lot of the folks who'll be listening to this will be in the recruiting industry as well. So tell me a little bit about that and what did they
Yeah.
say?
So that was actually after I got because I continued learning and I got my PhD in neuroscience. And I was working as an assistant professor, and I just realized that academia wasn't my culture. We can
Hmm.
talk for hours about academic culture. It wasn't my culture, and I felt like I wasn't having an impact. So I wanted to build bridges between science and business, but I didn't know how to do that because I have no experience whatsoever in business. And I met an entrepreneur who had a large recruitment agency here in the Netherlands. And he called me and we had this really fascinating talk, which he just started asking questions about what do you know? What's your knowledge? What do you have? And especially because of my PhD, I had a lot of knowledge around measuring skills, measuring behaviors and soft skills, and brain behavior relationships. So, what happens in our brains and how does that reflect it in behavior? And he's the one who said, you know what, I'm in the recruitment industry, which means I deal with people all the time. So I think what you know, what you can do is valuable, not just for our clients, but also for us, because this was back then they were scaling up. So in the time that I worked there, they went from 250 to 1,500 employees in 3 years.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's really like massive, massive growth. And he said, we have this organizational culture and we want to create a scientific approach to it. Why don't you he literally said, I don't know exactly what we can do together, but I see something here. So he just said, I'm going to give you a job and we'll figure it out as we go along.
That's really an entrepreneurial spirit, right? On both
Yeah.
sides, because you from your standpoint, you were prepared to dive in and kind of figure it out as you go along. But then
Yeah.
from his side, there was an opportunity there, and he didn't know necessarily how, but knew where they wanted to go. That's really insightful. And just on that side, just in terms of growth of a recruiting company, because again, there'll be a lot of recruiting leaders listening to this as well.
Mhm.
What was it that you think you done differently than maybe other companies in that space that you could grow from 250 to 1500 in such a short space of time? What were some of the things that, and not maybe you brought them to the table or the organization did, but what was that approach that was different?
Yeah, we definitely did it together. I have to say that. I think what I brought to the table was I started quantifying their culture. And I think that's the one thing when companies are scaling up, culture becomes important. But a lot of companies struggle to figure out what is our identity and what exactly, I mean, we have core values and we put them on a poster, we stuck them in the window, but what do they mean exactly? So I spent a lot of time working with the leadership of the organization, as well as the people in the organization to figure out they already had core values, but I helped them to quantify them in terms of observable behavior, which when you're growing, when you're hiring, they had sometimes 60 people a month that were starting.
Right.
So you don't want your core values or your expectations when it comes to behavior to be ambiguous. So we made it unambiguous. This is who we are. This is what we're looking for. And obviously, from a diversity perspective, you want that to be flexible. You don't want it to remain the same because company culture
Sure.
evolves. Absolutely. But it gives you a sense of this is our identity, and it helps people to understand who you are as an organization. When people understand your culture, then you can attract the right people. And that is that congruency between what you say you are and what you actually are is so crucial.
Yeah, that is something that is making me think a lot about brand, because I think brand is always seen
Mm-hmm.
as like a logo or some marketing material, but that
Yeah,
identity of what you do, and who better to demonstrate that than the people that work internally for you. And then obviously recruitment is such a people-driven business. So every time
absolutely.
you have a conversation with a client or a candidate, that impact is multiplied. So really, really insightful, and kind of touching a little bit more on some of the work that you're doing today. So you had somebody that had seen something in you, you saw something in them, and where you could add value, and then you continued that journey, and it seemed like you were doing some work around DE&I as well for organizations. And yeah, tell me a little bit more about that work that you were doing and how you got into that.
Well, that was, I was going to say it was an accident. It really wasn't an accident, obviously. But my expertise, I always say that my expertise is brain behavior relationships on the work floor. That's just what I do. And then when organizations come to me with issues, it's like whatever the issue is, I can help from that perspective. And I've just noticed a shift in organizations saying, DE&I has become more of a priority. To me, the important thing or my contribution to that field is the I part, so the inclusion part.
Right.
I'm not an expert on specific groups with specific diversity characteristics. I'm a woman, I'm multiracial, but all of that is not necessarily a part of what I do. My approach, my scientific approach relates to, okay, so say you want to bring diversity into the organization. How are you going to prepare your culture for that? Because if you bring people in, but you
Yeah.
continue doing things the way you've always done them, it's not going to work. You
Yeah.
need you need that openness. That's where you need your culture to evolve. So a lot of the work that I've done over the past couple of years has focused on creating an inclusive culture.
And that inclusive culture. So we talked a little bit about this in the recruiting industry, because when you implement an inclusive culture or a type of culture internally, it then reflects externally through
Mm-hmm.
your brand channels and then through your
Mm-hmm.
customers. Do you have like any examples of where you've seen that multiply from that internal to that external view, or things that are worth maybe taking note as someone running or leading a business, and how they build that to make sure that that reflects with their customers?
You mean how they should go about it? Is that the
What,
question?
yeah, so maybe how they should go about it, but also what that impact is. So once you get that internal culture right, what happens?
Ah. So what happens is, for one, like your turnover rates, they become normal again. Because if I've worked with a lot of organizations that for many years already had focused on diversity, and then they would ask me, "We're bringing all these people in, but they keep leaving.
Yeah,
What's going on?"
yeah.
And if they're able to make that switch where they create an environment in which the diversity that comes into the organization can actually thrive, they stay. So I think the approach there is for a lot of organizations, it starts with the marketing, it starts with the brand. Yes, we're inclusive. Yes, we're diverse. Yes, we have the rainbow flag and everything. But then you look internally and it's not really there yet.
Right, right.
So when that awareness is there, that's when I've seen the shift happening. It's about, to me, it's always about congruency. You have to determine, we are inclusive to what degree, because no organization is inclusive for everybody. That does not exist. That's impossible. You need to figure out how inclusive do we want to be, and then you need to act on it. Starts with the leaders, obviously, culture is hierarchical, but when that realization is put into practice, so when people are starting to act in agreement with what they are saying, then you see that shift happening, then you see the right people coming in. It's a really tricky process, though, because it requires a lot of self-reflection.
Sure.
And introspection. And the main thing is psychological safety. That's it's a bit of a buzzword these days, but in order to be successful, the first thing you need is psychological safety. You cannot learn. We just talked about what is the best way to learn. Learning comes from a place of safety, psychological safety for everybody. So yeah, the answer is a little bit all over the place, but that's because there's no holy grail in creating this. But once you do have it, when the willingness and the awareness is there, then magic really can happen.
Yeah, and it sounds to me that one of the really important parts is having your culture from inside to go out versus outside, and then trying to bring that in and saying, like you said, you've got the shiny stickers, you've got all of the buzzwords, and you have all the marketing material, but what actions are you taking internally, and how are you walking that talk?
Yeah, absolutely. I've literally had it happen. This was a number of years ago already, but I was asked to help to consult with an organization on diversity and inclusion. And one of the first things that they wanted to do with me was record videos for social media, which is odd.
Yeah. That does sound pretty. But you see it as well, like it's a weird one, because you'll go on websites and then you'll see the person that's on the website and they'll have this so-called diverse person or people on the site, but that's not a reflection of who they are and who their team is. And so you, in order to fly that flag or use that banner, if you want to, you've got to have some representation inside of that company in order to drive that. So that's a little bit about how you get there potentially, but the work that you're doing today, and we can touch on that either now and also a little bit later, but you're really starting from a lot of the grassroots levels now in terms of people finding purpose, and little people as well. So tell us a little bit about that work that you're doing, and how that's having an impact.
So are you talking about the work that I'm doing with the Contentment Foundation at the moment? Because it's one of the most amazing initiatives that I have been a part of ever, I would say ever. I started working with the Contentment Foundation, I'm going to say about 2 years ago now.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is really create a complete culture transformation in organizations at the grassroots level, but also like attacking it from both angles, really. So I think people will understand that you need leadership to be involved in order to make any change in an organization. But we are creating communities within organizations at every single level of the organization to really create what should I call this in English? A ripple effect. I think that's the word that I'm looking for.
And could you touch on that bit as well? So you said you're creating communities within organization. What is a community, and how do you create one?
Yeah. So to me, building community is about starting small and then scaling up, just as you would with a startup, so to speak. So what we try to do is we try to start with finding the people in the organization, and this could revolve around DE&I, but it could also revolve around well-being. A lot of the work that we do revolves around mental health and well-being. What we try to do is find the people in the organization who have the same passion that we have.
Right.
So in the beginning, intrinsic motivation is really important for anything, including behavioral change. So we find the people in the organization who are as passionate about the work as we are. We start with them. We train them, we show them, we teach them everything they need to know in order to become the ambassadors. And then we work a lot with large international organizations that are in different countries. So then we try to form local communities, because The one thing that you need to be respectful of when you want to do anything is cultural differences. So the communities that we build in organizations are local so that they can inform us on stigmas or best practices or challenges that are specific to their community. So it's the communities that actually help us to figure out what the best approach is, instead of us coming in and saying, so we have this product, we have this platform, or we have this app, or whatever it is that people can offer, and it's a one size fits all. I don't think when it comes to people and organizations that there is a one size fits all. And maybe that's my scientific approach, but making sure that you have a baseline, you do an analysis first so that you know what you're working with is incredibly important. And those communities help us to get that baseline and help us to determine what the best steps and what the next steps forward need to be.
So talk a little bit about that scientific approach to building community. What does that look like? And there are two, I think, members of the audience here. You're going to have people that are maybe agencies or selling a service around HR or consulting,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's internal as well. So how would you go around? How would you go about, should I say, building that scientific approach to creating a thriving community or community that adds value?
Yeah. So there are two different ways that we go about it. We're a group of scientists. So the Contentment Foundation was started at Yale University. So it's a group, the scientific approach has always been there. So there's a lot of research and knowledge that we have at our disposal. We have frameworks for how to build healthy cultures, frameworks for well-being. So on the one hand, we have that. On the other hand, there's the knowledge of the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd in the organizations that we're working with. So what we always try to do when we work with an organization, and obviously it is up to them, they're the clients, but we always advise them to start with what we call a culture analysis. And that culture analysis will either be based on our hypothesis around what a good culture looks like, if the company itself says we don't really know, we're open to anything. But sometimes there will be a strong sense of this is who we think we are, this is what we think the challenges are, and then those will be our hypotheses that we start with, and we collect data, and then we perform an analysis based on those hypotheses. And the reason we do it is culture is a feeling. And everybody, when you walk into an organization, you can kind of feel what the culture is, but culture is also based on assumptions. And so many times people assume that a culture is a certain way. And then when we dig a little bit deeper, we find out that there are some, at best, some nuances there. At worst, the culture is the complete opposite of what they think it is. It's important to know that. So our scientific approach doesn't revolve around a specific framework, but more around the scientific method. Measure, analyze, use a data-driven approach so that you're not working based on assumptions.
Yeah, and so that method is the same method that I suppose a lot of startups have tried to adopt as well, right? So kind of this method of building a company, really ensuring that you have an understanding of the problem statement, the hypotheses, what you want to solve, then you start to iterate with different versions.
Yep.
So it sounds to me like to get to that, and like we said at the start, you're never going to have a fully inclusive culture, but get a culture that's right for you. It's an iterative process, which means that you've got to be there for the long haul. Really insightful. And so some of this stuff is going to be obvious, but I'd love to hear from your standpoint of why a culture is great for business, not just good for business, but why building and identifying what your culture is great for business. What is it about that?
That's the $1 million question. I mean, they always say that strategy is what you want to do and culture is how you do it. I think in general, culture to me is just everybody's behaviors put together. If you have all the employees and you combine all of their behaviors, you get an organizational culture. And that can work for you or it can work against you. The reason I think culture is essential is because of the way the world works these days. So I do have a very strong opinion on what is a good culture and what is not a good culture.
Go for it. I'd love to hear that. I think that's important. Yeah. What is a good culture?
Okay, so I'll explain that in a minute. First, I'll explain why that is the case. Okay,
all right.
So when you look at the world today, it's dominated by change, right? Everything that we're doing constantly, like when my parents were still, my dad's retired, my mom is at the end of her career. Like when they started their careers, they could pretty much map out what their lives would look like at work, at least for a decade in the future.
But
These days,
isn't change the only constant?
it is. It has become the only constant. Like, that's what I always say. On the 21st century work floor,
Right.
change has become the only constant. It's not like that anymore. So it was like that for our parents. But today, I mean, a lot of people don't know what their jobs will look like next year,
Right.
let alone a decade from now. So
Right.
if you want to deal with change, when I look at that from a neuroscientific perspective, that ain't great, man. Because
Yeah.
change means unpredictability. And unpredictability to your brain means, oh, there could be a wild animal lurking behind a tree coming to eat you. That's your primitive brain in action. So you
Interesting.
get a stress response.
Yeah.
Stress on the work floor can be good or bad, and that's where culture comes in. So you can frame stress as threatening or challenging. When you frame it as threatening, what you see in behavior is rigidity. I call these the yes but people. These are the people who, whenever a change comes, they'll be like, yes, but I don't want to change. Yes, but why do I have to do it? Or my favorite one, yes, but we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
That's a culture where people are not that adaptable, not that resilient. If you can create a culture in which people frame stress as challenging instead of threatening, then you see resilience. Those are the people who are able to, when COVID hit, completely change their business models to adapt to what the world looked like back then, or who can come up with creative ideas to deal with whatever the world is throwing at them. So the reason I think culture is important is because the behaviors within your organization, within the individuals in your organization, are going to determine whether or not you, as a whole organization, are able to effectively deal with the change that's going to keep coming, because that is outside of our control. So a good culture has psychological safety. It has people who are willing to be vulnerable. It chooses autonomy over hierarchy. There's a lot of trust instead of control. It's all those little elements that you build into your culture that create resilience within your teams.
Yeah. Yes. I think that piece that you mentioned of the psychological safety, which is, as you said, started to be a little bit of a buzz term, but
Yeah.
it's really, really important because that's how you build bonds.
Yeah.
And bonds are built when you can connect with someone on a deeper level. And
Yeah.
so is it possible, do you think, for companies to build these bonds or communities with people that touch their brands, not necessarily people that work for their organization, but people that have some affiliation with their brand? Maybe they're a customer or a candidate is it possible for you to do that as well?
I think so. I mean, you've seen it happen in practice, right? Apple, like,
Yeah.
there are just people who are just they are a community. Elon Musk is very good at doing it with whatever company he's working on at the moment. There are just people who feel connected to him. However, people may feel there's a lot of opinions about him, of course, but those brands are so strong that people feel an intrinsic connection to the brand itself. I think that's the marketing side of things. So I do think marketing and culture go hand in hand. And I hope, I don't work for these companies, but I would hope that the thing that they're showing to the outside is also what they're like on the inside. Because if they can get both of them, I think that might be the holy grail of success.
Yeah. Yeah. I suspect it's not, to be really honest, from what I've
Well,
seen.
I
But I
wasn't going
think,
to say it, but if you say it,
yeah,
then yeah, I might be.
I think a lot of the companies have problems inside, and not any specific names that they don't show
No.
outside. But I think in the recruiting industry in particular, where your service is really connected to people,
Mm-hmm.
and in some senses, people are what you're trying to work with or sell into another business. Figuring out how you connect and communicate with those people, it seems to me like it's super important. And that's what we do, obviously, at EQ. We help companies build communities to
Yeah.
help them thrive and grow. So we're obviously, I'm super biased around that, because I think if you can build a great community, you can build a great company and a great brand. But sometimes, to the points that you mentioned, there's some work that needs to be done first. Are there like one or two things that you think every company could or should do to build a stronger either community or culture that maybe they just haven't taken that step yet, and you would encourage them to do so?
Yeah, I think that congruency is the first thing that pops to mind when you say that. The one challenge, because I've done a lot of work in recruitment over the years, because that's where I started out, of course.
Yep.
And I think the one thing that specifically the recruitment industry struggles with is that they're hiring for other companies.
Right.
So that means that sometimes the culture that they have is not in line with the culture that the other company might have, or they might have a very inclusive way of recruiting, but then the company that they're recruiting for might not have that. So that's always the challenge that you have as a recruitment agency, I think. And
So
I
just
haven't been able to solve that.
yeah, that's interesting. And I think maybe just unpacking that a bit. I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the parts is if you as an organization are there to serve your customer, and let's say it's the client that's paying, part of it is really deeply understanding their culture
Yeah.
and not just throwing bodies at it. And how you do that again is by building relationships and bonds
Yeah.
with the leaders there. And like, what are they really like? And I think the really, really good recruiting companies understand that. And especially for like large accounts where you're on site, because you almost become an extension of their
Yes.
team, right? Yeah, super interesting. Is there is there anything that, and it's funny how time flies because we're kind of like nearly 30 minutes in. Is there anything that you think organizations should know when embarking on this journey? Because you talked about change, and change can
Mm.
feel like it's threatening. Somebody
Yeah.
told me a long time ago that a better term to use is transformation because it has a positive connotation to it. But are there things that are worth mentioning to companies that are thinking about embarking on this change that they should really double click on?
Um,
Or
Many
transformation?
different things. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly, I do believe you can call it transformation, but in essence, people still have to do things differently. So when you
Yeah.
look at it in practice, it will still be like, no, I don't want to do that because it still means I need to change what I've been doing.
Right.
But I understand like communication is incredibly important. So I fully understand the thought behind that. Um, so I think there are different perspectives on how behavior change is most effective. Some say, oh, you have to go for the big change all at once, communicate it, and everybody goes for it. I'm more of a take small steps kind of my approach is more taking small steps and celebrating the small successes. So when you want to achieve some significant transformation within your organization, make sure that you have a very clear end goal in mind and that you do communicate that, but that you also have clear what are the steps that we need to take in order to get there. How can we create short-term success and short-term goals? Because people, human beings, are dopamine machines. So
Mm,
if we get a dopamine boost, our motivation will be triggered and we will keep going, but we need that boost. So if we're working towards a transformation that is 10, 15 years away, it's not going to work because that's too far. We need that short-term boost. So if you can build that into your organization, that's going to be very effective.
that is something that I've heard, but not in that way. The way that you put that with no, just from let's say from a scientific or neuroscience standpoint, the dopamine that we need as humans. So I see it with my kids all the time. Like they're playing a game, they get a reward, you get a coin, bing, 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 and you
Mm-hmm.
keep going. And we all know it and see it, but not around transformation. And we hear celebrate the small wins, but the why is because
Yeah.
of that feeling of success.
Yeah.
You want to feel successful along that journey, right?
Yeah.
Really,
I
really
love that you
interesting.
mentioned games because I mean
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a side path that we're taking
sure.
here, but
Yeah, let's do it.
in the past, I was head of research for a serious game developer. And if you want to know a success story about changing the culture, one of the most amazing projects that I've ever seen when it comes to behavior change was a game.
Mm,
And it was a game that they created for a supermarket chain. And that supermarket had, you have these people like the bakery and the butcher and the produce section, but these people are just basically they're filling shelves, right? They don't feel like they're part of anything anymore because people walk in, they grab their stuff and they leave. So these people were not motivated. But the supermarket wanted these employees to get an entrepreneurial mindset, to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. So how do you create an entrepreneurial mindset in people who don't give about their jobs because they don't feel like they're seen or heard? They created a game in which the bakery, the produce section, and the butcher became shareholders, virtual shareholders of the company. And every week they could choose one product that was their product of the week that would determine their stock, the value of their shares. So they would have to figure out, okay, what is the week going to look like? What product should we use? Which one could we sell the most this week? And then you had the cashiers who weren't part of these teams, but they could buy shares from whatever section they thought was going to be most successful. What you saw happening was that all of a sudden these people were so intrinsically motivated because they were in this game. For one, it created psychological safety just to experiment with things and fail because it's a game, it's okay.
Right.
And secondly, it triggered their intrinsic motivation. That was like gamification is a really big dopamine booster. So what they did was they started looking outside. The weather is going to be good this week. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put like what do you put on a barbecue? I don't know. The meat that you put on a barbecue.
Yeah, whatever you put, whatever you could put.
Whatever you put on the barbecue, hamburgers.
Vegetables, fish, whatever you want.
Vegetables, hamburgers, whatever. The hamburgers are on sale this week because it's barbecue weather, so I might have a chance to sell more of those. The cashiers got involved when the people came to just pay for their groceries. The cashier would be like, because they had bought shares in the butcher, they said, I don't see any burgers in your tray there yet. Maybe you should get some because it's really nice barbecue weather. You could actually see a shift in the way that these people interacted with their jobs because it was turned into a game. Everybody loves playing. It's fun, also when you're an adult.
You know what? So the dopamine hits, the games, something I think it's not a different perspective, but thinking about in a work environment, we talk about gamifying things because we always I think within HR and recruiting talk about incentives. Yeah. And a lot of the incentives are always financial. So how much is someone getting paid and that's important. And I always boil it down to a few things, right? You want to get respected for your work. You want to feel like you're doing something that's purpose driven, and you want to be incentivized fairly. But I think adding into that, making it fun, like right, just like we are here on this planet and we want to do good things and we want to change, but we also want to have fun. And so baking that into whatever you do and building culture and community seems like a key message.
Well, everything is a game though, except because I worked with game designers back then, and what they said was to me also, because I'm not a game designer, I got into this because I started researching it. And they said, you know what, Marcia, everything is a game. And if you want to make it better, just need to change the rules. If we created work, why have we created the game of work and made it so boring and so not engaging? If we can just change the rules, which is what they did with this game. It wasn't a game that they played. It was just their own jobs, but the rules were changed a little bit. If we can do that in society, I think so much is possible. Really good books have been written about this as well, about how everything is in essence a game. It's just we're playing it by the wrong rules.
So on that note, and we're going to close out shortly, but what's the one book that you would recommend that our listeners should read in relating to maybe either building culture or community or just anything that you think is important?
Yeah, so I'm going to move away from gamification there because there's one book that I think it's one of the best books that I've ever read. And the book is called Behave. And it's written by Robert Sapolsky. And it goes beyond gamification and culture. It goes into why do human beings do what they do? How does that work in their heads? What's the relationship with society? And Robert Sapolsky is the most amazing scientist and science communicator that I've ever seen. He looks like a rock star. He has really long hair. He's a neurobiologist, but his books are fantastic. He also has a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which explains how stress works in our bodies, because zebras don't get ulcers, humans do. And that's all because of the way we relate to the world. So Behave explains how our brains operate and where good and bad behavior comes from. It's a big book, but don't be scared. It's really interesting to read as well. It's long, but it's long because he gives a lot of details and he gives such great and funny examples. So that's the best book tip that I can give ever.
Fantastic. Well, that's amazing. Well, I could continue speaking to you forever, but I think we're now getting at time, and really want to thank you for all of your insights around culture, ensuring that companies have an approach that, as we said at the end, makes it fun and exciting. So create the rules to your journey. Is there anything that you would like to plug? Anything you're working on, and also where can people find you?
Yeah. So if there's one thing that I can plug, then it is the Contentment Foundation. I'm really, my heart and soul are in the Contentment Foundation. It's a nonprofit. And what we do is we help organizations with all sorts of challenges related to organizational culture. So that's mental health and well-being, DE&I, high performance culture, creating high performance culture is also something that we do. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because the more organizations we get to help, the more schools we get to help, because all of the profits from the corporate work that we do goes towards the school program that we implement globally. And the funds from the corporate programs help to bring the program to at-risk communities worldwide who aren't able to afford it themselves. So they get to help children, teachers, and parents in, you know, the most at-risk communities globally. So if you want to know more about that, go to contentment.org/business and get in touch on LinkedIn or whatever your favorite social media channel is. I'm there. Yeah, that's my main passion right now.
Well, again, thank you so much for spending the time. It's been wonderful, and we've got a lot of insights and gems, and I'm sure that the audience would appreciate the discussion. And yeah, look forward to continuing our conversation and making sure that the world of work is more fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, great. Talk to you soon.
Bye bye.